How do you prepare your data for AI success without compromising security? That's the key question we're diving into today's episode on XTraw AI. I'm your host, AI Raghu, and with me are two leading experts in AI and data protection. Joining us is Imran Chaudhri, Chief Architect of Healthcare and Life Sciences at Progress, who brings deep expertise in building secure, AI-driven data solutions. Alongside him is James Rice, Data Protection Evangelist at Protegrity, where he's known for his work in advancing data privacy as companies innovate with AI. We've got a fascinating conversation lined up for you today. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the world of AI. And hey, stick around until the end for more info. Let's dive in now. All right, welcome back to our Extra AI podcast conversations. And today we are going to do a kind of a roundtable, I would say, with two speakers or two guests, Imran Chaudhri and James Rice. The topic would be balancing innovation and security and how to prepare data for AI success. Welcome on board, Imran, and welcome on board, James. Both of you, could you give, maybe I'll start with you, Imran, could you give a bit of a background, a professional or a personal story about how you're involved with AI and data at Progress?
Sure. Actually, I've been involved in AI since about 2009, prior to Progress even. So for the last 15 years or so. The last company, I've been a serial entrepreneur before joining Progress, and the last company I started was basically teaching AI's medicine. So being able to look at full patient records and figure out what's really wrong with the patient in based on the record as opposed to based on what's in the problem list. And we built a human in the loop Spotify-like approval or disapproval system. So the AI system was actually learning from the users who were reviewing the content as well. And at Progress, I'm the generative AI lead for them, both for architecture and inbound product management.
Great. And that's a great story of how you got involved with AI. We'll be very excited to have further more conversations on this. And over to you, James. Could you also give a brief backstory, personal story, or a professional story, how you got into AI and data, and maybe also in the context of productivity?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So, just as a bit of background, I've been with Protegrity for about 3.5 years now, and I'm responsible for all the technical go-to-market teams. So that's our solution engineers, our customer success and technical account managers, as well as our services delivery team. But my career has really been about half on the consulting side and half on the software side. So I really started off in consulting, working with large corporations, kind of been involved with data from the very beginning. At Protegrity in particular, right, our data protection and privacy platform actually provides solutions to unlock sensitive data. So we take a bit of an interesting approach. While we're a security vendor, we're really focused on how do we help people with analytics, AI, ML, LLM, while still ensuring that data remains protected. Because if you think about it, right, our mission statement is to empower businesses to be able to use their valuable data without compromising on the privacy or security of that data.
Beautiful, amazing background. And I'm really excited to start our conversations in this. But before getting into the meat of this conversation, I would again go back to both of you. Maybe James, could you provide an example of how this landscape of AI in data management has evolved in the recent years and what you see happening, maybe in the context of productivity?
Yeah, there's a couple of key things, I think, because really when you think about how it's evolving, there's a lot more and much broader user interaction. So if you think about generative AI as an example, compared with traditional analytics, in traditional analytics, you would often have a curated data set or a Power BI report that's put together. So the structure's all there. Sure, the filters and data behind it may change, but it's very curated analytics. From a generative AI perspective, really getting a lot more ad hoc in that nature where things are not curated and you have to be ready for everything. So you'll have a much broader set of user interaction as well with people who are querying and questioning these type of systems. And what that drives too is really a data in motion conversation. If you think about it, data also becomes much more dynamic with generative AI workflows. So what that means is you can't necessarily maintain all the security policies and procedures that you had in place for data that was at rest. And then finally, you also probably layer in unstructured data. So there's a lot of solutions out there that are focused on structured data, but a large portion of the data that's going to be used in AI is also unstructured. So you're really kind of seeing a broader interaction, more data in motion, and unstructured data coming into the conversation.
Right. Beautiful. And the same question to you, Imran. I think, how do you see the landscape of AI in data management changing, and maybe a bit of a context with progress?
Yeah, so the way I would think about it is the need for data quality and real-time up-to-date data because of the need to feed Gen AI systems is just going through the roof. Great AI systems really require great information architecture these days. Every org, including ours, needs to prioritize getting their data information architecture into ship shape in order to be able to take advantage of and feed the Gen AIs the right data so that they can get, so the users can get the right answers.
Beautiful. And I will start with you, Imran. I know Progress focuses a lot on developing responsible AI-powered applications. Can you explain how, I know with the advent of generative AI and now a lot of this retrieval augmented generation or RAG happening, how does this fit into the strategy, and why do you see it a better alternative to traditional fine-tuning methods? Maybe your thoughts around that.
Sure. So responsible AI really comes from helping avoid the major pitfalls for generative AI systems. Some of the main ones are hallucinations, bias, not having the most recent data, not being able to do logical thinking, things like that, right? Um, uh, RAG in particular is about getting the right data to the Gen AI so that it'll reduce the occurrences of these sort of side effects or natural effects of a Gen AI system. Whereas fine-tuning is about taking the private data and putting it into a Gen AI model. When you do that, you still have all of the existing problems that exist in that we just briefly touched upon that are not really solved by fine-tuning. So that's one. Two, like the saying, literally, like last night at our conference, we were discussing, why the data is so important, why feeding the right data is so important. You are what you eat, right? In the human space, right? The sort of translation into Gen AI is only as good as the data you feed it. And if you're not getting the right data and finding the right data in context and understanding the context of the question or the task that the user's asking, then you have a problem. The other thing is data changes in real time. Unfortunately, we live in a real-time world, and fine-tuning has this lag between when you get new data and when you can release a new model, right? So that's another thing to think about. Also, from a semantic and graph RAG perspective, which is sort of all the rage, but we've been doing it for the last year and a half already. The semantic graphs capture subject matter expertise from within the corporation and then allow you to use it in real time and instantly get better results. If you change your graph a little bit, the very next person that asks the same question will get better data and get different answers. So the ability to react in real time to the needs of the corporation is something that RAG provides that fine-tuning does definitely has a problem with.
Beautiful. I really echo with your thoughts about how we can put together this. Obviously, when we do the retrieval augmented generation, I think things get much better. I would now want to kind of get into the security aspect of the data as well, because that is equally important. So, James, I know Protegrity emphasizes a lot on data security and privacy in these different enterprise AI applications or AI applications as such. So what do you see the biggest risk when companies try to deploy these kind of AI without adequately considering the data security, and how does Protegrity help mitigate these risks? So that if you can give a high-level overview, then we can go into the other details.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a really important question because when it comes to data security, I think there's a couple of key things to think about. To me, it first starts with things like legal and IP infringement, right? You want to ensure that the model and the data don't infringe on ownership of another legal entity, especially when you're looking at things that may be trained on public data. You also want to then look at the outputs of that from a hallucination or safety perspective so that you can ensure that the outputs from generative AI applications are accurate and they're not providing wrong or harmful or biased answers to a user. And then, kind of last, but definitely not least, it all comes back to the data itself. It's the intellectual property or the sensitive data leakage, because you've got to ensure that all that valuable data you have is kept private, is kept secure, is not being exposed to unauthorized use, unauthorized consumption. Because if you don't, right, you start to open yourself up to compliance violations. Let's look at what happened to Meta last year. I think it was about $1.3 billion. They were ordered to stop transferring Europe user data to the US. And quite frankly, regardless of what happens with that on appeal and all the things that are going on there, I think the EU decision really shows how government policies are actually reversing data globalization, and they're threatening to upend the free flow of data. So at Protegrity, our goal is to really help companies address these challenges. We do this by really enabling businesses to unlock the full potential of their sensitive data, because really what you want is to allow for secure internal consumption and safe external sharing of data. So from a Protegrity standpoint, we're really focused on things like advanced data protection. So it includes de-identification and privacy enhancing techniques that embed the data itself with protection, because our goal is to ensure that sensitive data remains protected, but that it's still being accessible for consumption, for analysis, for collaboration. Because while we are, a security vendor, we're not just focused on locking down data. We really focus on how do we empower data consumption, because it's one of the most valuable commodities that all of us have within our businesses.
Yeah, really, really agree with what you have said, James. I would like to take this a bit further. Maybe if you could, from your experiences, what are these essential steps companies need to take to ensure that their data strategies are robust enough so that you can support AI applications without compromising any of these things that we are discussing about the security or the performance? Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, this is actually probably one of my favorite questions, because it's so how do we start, right? How do we do better? What can we do here? And one of the things that we talk about with our customers a lot is segmenting your data controls on multiple dimensions. And you would start that with risk. So let's think about, all data does not have the same risks. Even personally identifiable information can have different levels of risk, right? A credit card number versus an email address versus a first name. There's drastic differences in the risk, which means you can't apply the same controls across that different data. So then from there, after risk, you want to think about, how's the data going to be consumed? Just as all data doesn't have the same risks, all data is not consumed in the same way either. So ultimately, all data protection can't be the same. If we think about data consumption in really a clear text context, I would say the thing that you want to ask is, how many people, processes, or systems have access to your data? And maybe more importantly, how many should? Because one of the things that we test, really kind of thinking about like a hypothesis here for your listeners, of if we change the raw state of sensitive data in an organization from clear text to protected tokens, data can flow freely without limitations. So, if I tend to ask people, how many people in your organization need access to see something like social security number in the clear? The answer I get is often very, very few. And why is it very few? It's because most of your systems and people don't care if my social security number is 47631980. And yes, I just made that up completely. But if that's my social, or if my social is 123456789, or any other random 9 digits, It doesn't matter as long as the referential integrity is maintained, right? The definition of a social security number is it's unique to me and it can identify me. And so, be that the raw social security number or a token that's replaced it, you can do the same thing. And I would bet for those of us here as power users of data in one way, shape, or form, we know that you don't really care what my social security number is. Your marketing analytics don't care. Your ML models don't care. Your Gen AI doesn't care. Those misconfigured cloud storage buckets don't care because the real number is irrelevant. It's all about that referential integrity and the correlation of me and my activities across really a wide range of systems. So the question I would be asking is if I can just as easily be uniquely identified by a token, some unique random 9-digit number, as I can by my real social security number, then why is the raw state of my social security number in the clear across hundreds or thousands of systems within an organization?
Right, right. No, that's a great question. That's a great question that you have put, right? I think I was also over the weekend, I was at a conference about democratizing the data, and we're talking about this digital papers at Stanford University. And there's a lot of conversation about this kind of information, right? Like how do you secure your data? How do you really preserve your data, and how do you really make sure that data is used in the right way? So now I would like to get to you, Imran, about, yeah, we've discussed about the aspects of the security of the data, the need for maintaining this privacy and other things. And I would like to come to progress and about, you guys are focused on building responsible AI applications. So which is where preparation of the data for AI is going to be one of these important steps, right? So could you discuss some best practices in achieving this kind of AI data readiness?
Sure.
Yeah.
So one thing to think about is most organizations happen to have and will continue to have, I think, data in a lot of different databases, data silos. The reason those things exist and grow up in different organizations is that you have different applications, and each of those applications tend to have their own sort of little mini databases. You have different departments requiring different levels of security and so on, right? But if you can either sort of think about data as a data mesh or a data fabric and bring in what I would call the discoverable, searchable sets of data into a central indexing platform, whether it's the actual data or whether it's part of the data or whether it's just metadata about the data, it all depends on the use cases in terms of what you want to use to find the data. And then you can make the same kind of business object look the same no matter which of the 10 systems it came from. Then you have a very highly controlled, quality curated, fit for use solution that can be used against multiple use cases. And the key there is that you want to be able to um, generate really good quality data, not through programming, not through sort of standard ETL tools, but really through configuring. Like, oh, this field from this data source is really our enterprise version of the first name, right?
Right.
And yes, it's called FN in this data source, right? So the ability to translate the labels to a common format that everybody in your organization can use, the ability to take in the security considerations and lock down the data at the data level, so that only the right people with the right roles are able to access the data, again through configuration-driven capabilities. The ability to take the content itself, like 012 might stand for male, female, other in one system, and MFO might be another one in another system. But the ability to translate the content into a standard content space and a standard vocabulary or semantic set also helps with making sure that the data is ready for consumption by humans and by AI systems.
Beautiful. I completely agree with that. So which means that companies have to come up with a proper data strategy
and to address some of these biggest challenges the companies are facing out there, and which will kind of come to maybe the question about having a comprehensive data platform. I know Progressive emphasizes on the importance of a comprehensive data platform. So, in that sense, could you talk a bit about how such a platform could support the AI initiatives and what common pitfalls companies face if they lack a unified data strategy and they do
Right.
not follow this kind of thing?
So I've built both kinds of systems. I've built a unified data strategy system, which Progress supports very well. And prior to knowing about the existence of the Progress data platform, I built a multi-storage persisted set of data for that AI company that I was talking about, Apixia, right? Um, the deal was I brought the data in through Hadoop for that particular use case. I had my front end website running through a SQL database. I had my patient records in Cassandra, and so on and so on, right? The problem with that is it works, but you end up with 40 or 50 odd services that you have to keep running all the time, and usually one or two of them is breaking at any point. So your support and ops team has to spend a heavy amount of time monitoring and fixing the stuff that's broken. So that's one. The other thing is you end up creating what I call a data inventory problem. Basically, did the data that came in through the first stage make it through stage 5? And if stuff got dropped and if there were errors, which ones got dropped and how do I reprocess them to get them to stage 5, right? The nice thing about a transactional multi-model, multi-view, single source repository is that the second you put something in, all the different views and all the different ways of looking at the data become available to the consumers in real time with a transactionally consistent way. And think of us in sort of the enterprise world, think of us as the Google for your private data with the security and quality control built in as part of the processing engine.
Mhm, mhm. Beautiful, beautiful. So, yeah, that's a great way. I think I would like to, at this juncture, I would like to come back to you, James. I think we are talking about now coming into the security aspects and the privacy related regulations. Uh, I know there are a lot of data privacy related regulations are evolving rapidly. And so maybe how can companies stay compliant while leveraging AI? Could you share any real-time examples? We do not need to, go into the names of the companies or something like that. Any public information we can talk about of how companies have successfully able to balance the data usage and the data protection, because that is going to be important, right?
Yeah, this is critical. Balancing that usage and protection is really what everybody's trying to do, and because customers and employees they have a right and really a strong growing desire to maintain their privacy. Even the most well-intentioned organizations are struggling with the multitude of regulations that are currently there and all the things that are going to be coming. So for somebody to be able to overcome those regulatory compliance challenges, they really need to be looking at tools for data discovery, data protection and privacy, as well as the automation of compliance reporting. You kind of got to bundle all of those pieces to it together so that you can ensure that sensitive data like PII, PCI, PHI, it's properly discovered, it's secured, it's monitored, and it also, is enabling organizations to stay compliant with those ever-changing regulatory landscape. Because, I mean, let's just be frank: if there's one consistent with regulations, it's change, and it's going to continue to change and continue to evolve. So, really, we're helping customers try to future-proof against regulatory change, because we've seen time and time again where the EU courts or sovereign nations or even different legal interpretations all say that de-identified, pseudonymized data is actually not subject to those same restrictions. And I think a really good example of this is we were working with a large Fortune 500 global bank. And their desire was to do marketing analytics. They wanted to bring all their data together globally to run marketing analytics. So that included data from the EU, that included data from Switzerland, And so let's pick on Switzerland for a minute. We
Mhm.
all know how particular the Swiss are with their banking data, right? This company was able to prove to the Swiss government and their external auditor they could actually pick up data out of Switzerland, move it to the US for processing. And even if the US government compelled that bank to turn over the data, they physically couldn't. They say you have to go back to Switzerland where all of that key material, all the protection is provided. So what that means is they were able to bring sensitive data into the US, do a large global processing on their data, and then segment that data back out to the individual countries who could re-identify and take advantage. Because all of the work that the organization needed to do, it goes back to my previous point. It doesn't matter what someone's credit card number is or someone's social security number is, as long as it maintains the referential integrity. I can still run my analytics without knowing if it's James or Imran's account. That's irrelevant to the analytics. And that's really kind of the point. But
Sure.
I would add maybe just like I guess one last piece to it, because it's not just about compliance, thankfully, right? Companies can achieve regulatory compliance, but also really drive those business benefits and get improved security and operational efficiencies and cost savings and competitive differentiation. So even as a security company, it may seem counterintuitive, but we don't want to lock down your data. Our goal is to empower businesses to not only meet compliance needs, kind of to your question, but how do I leverage that data securely and responsibly to drive the growth across the business? And that was kind of a good example from that large Fortune 50 global bank.
Right, right. I think that's a great example that you have quoted, James. I would like to stay on that example. I think maybe I would like to, I know earlier we have in our conversation, in this podcast conversation, already mentioned about data breaches, right? I think I know in the light of the recent data breaches that are happening or happened, there is a lot more increased regulation. So, what kind of proactive measures do you think have to be implemented to prevent any future risks? I know you've rightfully quoted a very good example, a Fortune 50 company, an example, like, right? Like, I think it's like now we know about these kind of things happen. So what are these proactive measures these kind of companies or things should be taken care of?
Yeah, it's a great question, right? This company really did have to rethink their approach to data privacy around some of the analytics and AI they wanted to put in place. And what I'm really talking about here is something that's really more modern, field level, data centric protection and privacy, because that's what accelerates consumption. Because what it's doing is it's actually correcting the natural state of sensitive data based on how it should be consumed by most of your organization. Now, don't get me wrong, it still applies all the rigorous controls to the small minority that require data to be in the clear. But let's think about it this way. If 1% of my organization should have clear access to something significantly risky, like a credit card or a social security number, right? We already kind of said very, very few people need that kind of data. So if that's the case, why not land that data tokenized? Because what that means is you can then give instant access to 99% of the use cases within your organization because the protection is embedded into the data itself. So 99% of the use cases your org has can basically be enabled with virtually no risk. You don't want to continue to spend time and effort on technology controls that don't match the natural state of data consumption within your org. Let's take social security number as just the easiest example. I bet most people would agree that they are going to block most of their organization from seeing a social security number. And so you can do that with tokenized, de-identified, pseudonymized data. And so what that means is you're now inverting the problem. Instead of having to say 99% of the time to stop that access or mask that data or block someone from doing something, you actually invert the problem and you're able to give that free flow of data for 99% of the use cases, which really drives a better security risk and compliance posture, lower friction for your data analyst and data scientists who want access to data, better user experience, and you know what, quite frankly, a net increase to your organization's data value, which is what we're all trying to get to.
Beautiful, beautiful. I completely echo with your thoughts. Now, before I jump into the other aspects of hallucinations and other things, I would like to get back to you, Imran. Could you share some insights on how organizations can balance the need for this data access to enhance the AI performance so that they can maintain strict data governance and compliance? So there is this need, right? Like, can you share some insights about this?
Yeah, so I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with what James said. If you
Mhm.
can obfuscate the super sensitive data sets, that reduces the amount of security domains that the company has to think about. Um, Even with obfuscation, though, I suspect there will be hundreds or even thousands of security domains that end up happening, especially in larger organizations. And if you can lock your data down, if you can group your data into what we call collections in sort of our platform. And a collection is just a fancy way of saying a label. So if you're familiar with Gmail, I can have a
Mhm.
Gmail that is labeled for, hey, this is from Raghu. This is about X Talks webinar. This is about whatever else. So I can have multiple topics against that same email, right? So in our world, those things are called collections, and you can have multiple collections against a single row of data in our data platform, right? And the what we normally do in large enterprises is we tie those collections to roles in the enterprise, usually using Active Directory or something like that. And then if a user comes in with Active Directory role one, and he has access to the general public data, and
Mhm.
he asks a question, um, and that is related to some private data. Um, our database will just not send the data as part of the information that the Gen AI will try to use to answer it. So he will get either the Gen AI will say, depending on how you configure it in sort of our demos, we configure it to say, if you don't have the right data to answer the question, just say I don't have the right data to answer the question, right? Don't make up a hallucination, right? Don't make stuff up, right? Then another user comes in, and let's say they have access to the NDA related data, and they ask the same exact same question. Now the system goes, oh, this role is allowed to see this data set. Let's see if this is relevant to the question that the user asked. Oh, yes, it is. Let me give chunks of that data into the prompt to the Gen AI so that the Gen AI can answer very reliably from the data set that exists that user is allowed to see. So by tying the roles to the data security at the data level, you now have a way of in a very application independent way of knowing who's allowed to see what. And you can have
Mhm.
dozens of different applications running off the same platform and performing through a Gen AI system with the same level of security that you would have had just by doing a SQL query or whatever else that you would normally try to do for querying the data.
Beautiful, beautiful. I think at this point, I would like to pivot into that conversation about progressive, how progress has used RAG to avoid common AI pitfalls, like whether it is hallucinations and how it has improved the data decision-making process uh, that you are, and how you are helping your clients. Could you elaborate a bit more with an example, without sharing any names of the companies, but maybe providing an example so that it
Sure,
can
sure.
help
So,
the
so,
audience a bit
so,
more?
so what the Progress Data Platform has is what I call a multi-model database. You can store a PDF document, but then you can look at content within that PDF document as if it were a graph or
Mhm.
text embedding vector or a set of tables where you've extracted pieces of stuff from a table in that PDF that is useful to be represented in a table. Or you can look at it as this is the concept I'm interested in. How many other concepts co-occur with this other concept, right? So be able to see
Right.
things that are related to each other naturally without even having formed actual graph links within the content, right? So this whole multi-model thing lets us discover data really, really well, and lets us also discover the intent of the user. So what is the user asking about? What are the key things that the user is interested in? And we can then for example, take those key concepts and prioritize them in the returned results so we can adjust in real-time relevancy. You can have different use cases. Like in one of our demos and examples, we allow the user the ability to say these 10 documents are really, really important to me for this kind of whenever I do queries in this role, right? And then what we will do is we will not only take the user's query, but we will also take all of the content in those 10 documents and use that to decide what is important to return to the Gen AI to be able to give the user an answer. This sort of drives what I call the context is king strategy. Finding the right context, finding the right needles in the haystack that the user needs to see in real time, so that they get the best answer possible from what they are allowed to see based on their roles, right? That is how we really improve the RAG over and above what most other RAG solutions are able to offer right now.
Beautiful, beautiful. I like the piece of that you're explaining about the context, how important it is, the context is in the whole scheme of the things.
Yeah.
So coming to you, James, I would like to now pivot a bit more and get into the aspect about working with the sensitive data, right? I think when working with sensitive data in these different AI models, how does Protegrity, the solution Protegrity, I think, ensure that the data remains private throughout the AI lifecycle, especially when you're doing all these model trainings and inferences and other things? Because I know security of the data is very important, and that this is where I think your solution will focus a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. And this may be a bit controversial, but I'm happy to kind of challenge a bit, because I think if you don't have protection embedded into the data itself, you kind of have no protection at all when it comes to these AI inferences, training, and models, because of all the things we talked about before: more data in motion, more people using it, like lots of things to think about. Now, again, I can understand that's challenging because it's challenging the status quo. The status quo tends to be more what I like to call envelope level protection. It's protection that sits around the data. And so if we just look at some of the stats, I'm not a huge stat guy, but there's one that always sticks out to me, which is in 2023, globally, we spent $183 billion on security spend. That was a 14% increase year over year. Yet compromises increased by 78% in that same time. So clearly something isn't working. And maybe a spoiler alert for those that are in financial services, healthcare, or transportation: you actually topped the list, more than doubling the compromises from 2022 to 2023. And over 80% of those compromises involve data stored in the cloud. So why does everyone else seem to get this so wrong? Why has 183 billion in annual spend not solved the problem of usability versus security? Well, I think if you just look at what we're actually spending money on, it answers the question. We're spending money for security on protecting applications, worrying about the access rights, securing the infrastructure, hardening the network, trying to lock down the cloud. But what are they not protecting? They're not protecting the data itself. We have spent $183 billion, and I say we because it's all of us. We've spent $183 billion surrounding our data with security, which, now don't get me wrong, it's important. Security is very much a defense in depth strategy, but I would challenge that. Why are we stopping just short of the goal line? It's the data that's the most valuable commodity. So it's time to stop surrounding the data and really embedding protection into the data itself. And there's one just great example. I always hear, but all our data is encrypted in the cloud already, so we're good, right? Well, that encryption they're talking about is coarse grain encryption. It's really like a light switch. It's either on or off. And what it's protecting is the files and the infrastructure that data is sitting on. Yet there's plenty of people who have access to the file or access to the data store. So when they are granted access, that coarse grain envelope encryption turns off. And the easiest example of this is a database administrator. When a database administrator logs into a database, they likely see all of the data in the clear. Yet we could probably argue that your database administrator doesn't really need to see your most highly sensitive data in the clear to be able to do their job.
Yeah, beautiful. So I know we are coming to the end of the conversation. I believe there are, before I go into the most important or important part of our podcast, I have one question to both of you about what kind of advice you would want to give to companies that use generative AI effectively while avoiding all these kinds of data privacy, security, and compliance related issues. Maybe I'll first start with you, James, and then we go to Imran.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think it goes back to a little bit about the unique data privacy and security challenges we talked about before, right? Much broader user interaction because lots of people are querying Gen AI both internally and externally, data in motion, unstructured data becoming more and more important. And so the advice I would give is really that companies need a solution that can discover, classify, tag, and take enforcement on both structured and unstructured data. And it has to be able to do so as part of a runtime. It can't just be a data at rest because, again, there's lots of runtime activities going on, especially with a generative AI model. And so to me, it really kind of breaks down into probably 3 or 4 key things. It's the auditing and monitoring. As we're kind of dipping our toe into generative AI, just knowing the who, what, when, where, why, how, what questions are being asked, what data is being retrieved, what fine tuning is happening to the model, just understanding, even being able to audit, being able to get that visibility into what's going on is, I think, a huge win for organizations as they're trying to figure out kind of how they progress further. Then really it comes back to the data leakage conversation as well, right? Making sure that you're looking at, is your IP or any of this sensitive data being exposed? And then finally, it's really more of a content moderation conversation. So you need to kind of ground yourself, and we're looking at hallucinations and content filtering for safety. But we're also looking at things like malicious prompt injections. Is somebody trying to do something where they're telling the AI model to forget everything it already knows? I'm now your master. Do the things that I want you to do. How are you guarding against those type of activities as well? Because quite frankly, not everyone's going to be nice to your AI model.
True. Great piece of advice there, James. Over to you, Imran. Would you also like to weigh in some thoughts here?
Yeah. So what I've been telling customers is the best way to get started, especially for the ones that are new in the Gen AI space, is to start at the use case level. Think about the use case, understand the use case, estimate an ROI, understand the risk profile of your data, and maybe even start off with data that is less sensitive and less less risky from a loss of IP or protection perspective, right? So these are things I always tell people, hey, if it's your first project, find something easy, right? Find something and learn and figure out and prove to yourself that you can lock down the data, that you can secure it at the data level, at the content level, at the individual token level, right? As you go. Then sort of the next step is, once you find your use case, rope in your subject matter experts for that use case, and essentially capture their subject matter expertise knowledge in a knowledge graph. And once you've done that, then you have the ability to find the right data and understand the user's intent for that use case. We just finished up a project with a very large international food processing company, and we did exactly those steps, right? First, we picked a set of data that was public, right? Then we talked to the subject matter experts about that data and captured a set of concepts, less than 100 concepts, really. It wasn't a lot. And we placed that in a graph, and then we used that graph to help answer the questions that the end users were asking. And for that use case, we hit 99.5% accuracy. And it was not just accuracy that was important to them, it was completeness of the answer too. So we were able to answer accurately and completely based on sort of a very simple project parameter set.
Beautiful, beautiful. I really like the way you put that, Imran. I know we are coming to the end of the conversation, so I will now come with this interesting question that I try to put to our XTraw AI guests. So, in one word or one sentence or one phrase or whatever, what is the unique factor progress brings to the table? Because there's a lot of competition out there, and how do you guys differentiate?
Right. So I would say because we have most of the competition out there in the RAG space has to date been about vectors. And hey, you can use vectors to potentially get your data back. Unfortunately, vectors are using very small models. And the way I look at generative AI models in general is they are knowledge compression systems. So you might take a terabyte of data and store it in 300 million parameters, right? But storing that same data in a billion parameters is a lot less compression than in 300 million parameters, and so on, right? Um, uh, when you're looking at trying to build out these systems, you want to find what we bring that's unique to the table is we were like, okay, great. You want to do vectors? Let's let you do vectors. But you should also be doing regular Google-like search. You should also be doing semantic search. You should also be doing tabular queries. You should also be looking at what's occurring next to what else in your whole database, right? You should also be able to do geospatial filtering if that's what you need to do, right? So by using all of the tools in your toolkit to find the right data, you will improve the amount of context that you deliver to the Gen AI, and then you improve the accuracy, reduce the risk of all of the side effects and things like that. That's sort of the unique thing that we bring to the table. I would call that another way to think about it in two words is we bring data agility to your Gen AI solutions.
Beautiful, beautiful. I like the way how you put it, like data agility to these Gen AI compression systems. I think that's what I think the other term you used. I think good.
Yes.
Coming over to you, James, I think again the same $1 million or the $1 billion question. How, in maybe in one word or one sentence or one phrase, how would you put about Protegrity?
Yeah, it's I kind of put it this way. For customers that are trying to solve these challenges, they need a single platform that embeds data protection into the data itself. That not only focuses on protecting data, but really is focusing on empowering data consumption, because at the end of the day, we want to get value out of our data, and locking it down is not the way to do that. Consuming it is the way to do it. But you also need to do all of this really from the top down with a single standardized policy, because you don't want to leave your security up to your cloud engineers on AWS, GCP, or Azure. You don't want to leave it up to your data warehouse admins in Snowflake or Databricks, or your ETL pipelines, or whatever it may be. You want a standardized way of looking at this. And something that can also go where your data is today and where it's going tomorrow, because as we all know in this conversation, there's new tools popping up all the time.
Right.
And with that, you also have to be able to have the options necessary to protect data differently based on business needs. Because I agree with what Imran was saying before. Not all data is the same. Maybe said more specifically, not all data consumption is the same. So all data protection can't be the same. You need the flexibility to be able to support your environment in a secure way. And so if I had to sum this up from a Protegrity perspective, it really is about putting the word secure in front of anything you do in your data world. If you want to do data consumption, it should be secure data consumption. If you want to do AI, it should be secure AI. That's really where Protegrity comes in, is adding the security and privacy while being able to ensure you can take advantage of all the AI, ML, LLM models.
Beautiful, beautiful. I really like the way you put it. Secure in front of anything that you with your data or with your AI, whether how you in whatever form or whatever way you consume it. So I know we are getting close to the podcast conversation. So I would come to you, James. Maybe any closing remarks or key takeaways that you would like to provide to our audience, and maybe where they can find more information about Protegrity.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, I typically, when I'm working with customers, I start with something a little provocative and a little challenging. I say, what if I told you I could show you a way you never have to worry about the security, audit, or compliance of your sensitive data again? And before they can call me crazy, I often tell them that we're going to let them in on a way to unlock sensitive data to meet the usability needs of the business, while also balancing the security needs of the most sensitive data that you have. And so it goes back to number one, making sure that you're segmenting data based on your organization's risk and consumption requirements. You need to look at both of those. High risk, low consumption may have a different security posture than something that's low risk, high consumption. So you really need to segment that data based on those two axes, and then you have to go beyond the traditional legacy envelope level security. Let's just be clear: the status quo doesn't really work. For us to think that the legacy and more traditional security models of the last 10, 15, 20 years are going to meet the new challenges of the next 10 to 15 to 20 years is a little crazy. I mean, there's new capabilities, more modern, agile data protection that can really be applied to help you take advantage of your data, because that's what Protegrity is here to solve. And Protegrity isn't around just because of security, audit, and compliance challenges either. Protegrity is here because sensitive data is important to everyone. My sensitive data is out there. Your sensitive data is out there. Your family and friends' sensitive data is out there too. So it's really all of our responsibility to make sure sensitive information is protected by default, because it really is the right thing to do. And as you start moving into a Gen AI world and all the things that we've talked about here today, that becomes even more important.
Over to you, Imran. Any closing remarks and key takeaways for the audience?
Sure. What I'd like to say is accurate, secure, transparent, and agile data in a simple to use single service platform will help you create generative AI solutions that are going to be trustworthy and responsible. And I'll just stop there.
Thank you, guys. I think that's an amazing conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Raghu.
As we come to the close of today's episode, I would first like to take a moment to thank James Rice and Imran Chaudhri for their fantastic insights on balancing AI innovation with data security. It's been an incredible, enriching conversation, and we appreciate both of you sharing your expertise with our audience. Personally, I learned a lot in this conversation about data security, data compliance, and responsible AI. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. We hope you gained enough valuable takeaways from today's discussion on preparing data for AI success. Don't forget to stay connected with XTraw AI podcast. We have got an exciting lineup of episodes ahead in season 11, covering topics like AI, generative AI, and the ever-evolving tech landscape. As always, I'll be tagging Mr. Imran as well as James on the LinkedIn post. And if you have any further questions, you can directly reach out to them, or you can even directly engage with them. You can also alternatively reach out to me, Raghu Banda, on my LinkedIn, and I can put you in touch with them. As you know, there are other social media handles where you can reach out to me on Twitter, X, or Threads, my RK Banda handle. You can also go to our website, XTrawAI.com, XTrawAI.com, and there are humongous amount of other episodes available where you can reach out and learn a lot about the different topics that we deal with. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on our expert conversations, actionable insights, and deep dives into the world of AI. Stay tuned for what's coming next. We are just about getting started. Catch you in the next episode. Until then, have a good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you're tuning in from. Happy predicting the future with AI technologies. This is your host, Raghu Banda, signing off. Thank you and bye-bye.